Okay, now I am 86 and Sonny is now 95. So
94? Not 95 yet.
94.
Mm.
Okay, so if we wander a bit, don't worry. This is I feel is very important because I think Sonny was in her day was a very important person involved in the development of the national drama. Anyway, Sonny, I want to go back to the beginnings. What made you enthusiastic about drama? What was it about drama that made in the earliest days?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was always interested in performing from when I was almost a little toddler. I had a very mixed beginning well, we won't go into that now, but I had three mothers and two fathers in my time. And I think the acting business sort of was an escape from all sorts of things. I used to put on concerts from a very early age, and I would boss people around and direct them and, do a sort of dramatic version of Chattanooga Choo Choo and all this sort of stuff. So I've just kind of like always been involved. And then I went to Seatoun School and we had we used to have school journals then. That was the main thing. There was always a little play in the school
Yes,
journals.
true.
And because I was a good reader, I was always chosen to read. It must have been very boring for the other kids. And so we would go out front with our school journal and do our little reading and act up a bit, that sort of thing.
What benefits do you think you got out of performing?
I don't know. I suppose I must have got a lot of things out of my system. It's hard to tell, really.
Would you say that
It gives you some sort of confidence
yes?
for doing things in public, which I've probably always had. I mean, I've always been happy to speak in public, and
Well,
yeah.
directing plays requires a great deal of confidence. That's one of the things.
Mm.
You've got to believe in what you're doing and believe in yourself, don't you, really?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very important. Now, you moved to Wellington East Girls College, which has a great reputation for developing all sorts of people, including people like Nola Miller and Barbara Ewing and others.
Yeah.
What did Wellington East do for you?
Well, they had a good drama club, and they were very good in the arts, And again, we had a very good hall with a big stage, and again, I always used to get the parts. I can remember playing an old man, and I think it was the man who came to dinner, and I had done my hair white with powder. You used to put talcum powder in it, in the middle of everything, like a thing of powder rose in the air. I must have brushed my hair or something like that. Silly things like that. Yes, so I got good opportunities there, really.
But in those days, of course, for a start at any rate, the Rongadai College where I went, there were a lot of boys
Brother college, sister college.
a lot of the boys had to play girls, and
That's
obviously
right.
in
We
your
played
school
boys.
there were a lot of girls playing boys. So, but you also at Rongadai College there was a great deal of camaraderie between the two colleges, and
Yes, there was.
people like Clive Rebel and others, Nick Garland and others worked with from Rongadai worked with you people at Wellington East.
Yes, occasionally, mainly musicals. I think when I was there, the Gilbert and Sullivan type thing. Yeah,
Well,
I think.
there's been some wonderful people that have come through that, and I remember myself, particularly at Rongadai College, there were two teachers who were very keen on drama. One was Doug Edwards,
Oh yes.
who was involved mainly with, I don't know what theatre, but he had done a lot of theatre at some
Unity,
stage,
perhaps, I'm not sure.
and Jack Shellcrash, who was very much involved with Unity Theatre, which was a bit sad for Jack because he got very badly treated later in his life because of the relationship between Unity Theatre and the Communist Party. At Rongadai College there was Reds in the Beds at one stage, and Bonk Scottney and others who had connections were that one of the parents tried to get them all fired. But and also it was Jack, dear old Jack, who was a bloody good lecturer. He had trouble later on in his existence when he had the possibility of taking over, becoming head of the Teachers College. which is a bit sad.
Yes, I vaguely remember all that because Jack went through Teachers College with me because he was a rehab with one of the returned servicemen. That was the only time when there were more men than women in that college, 46, 47, I think. So I was friends with him and Kate for many, many, many years.
But Teachers College, to me, was the great beginning of my ability to find myself, actually. And the lecturers there, including Anton Bott and Jack and Doreen Blumart and many others, actually encouraged you to develop your own talents and abilities.
It was a fantastic place, and there was a huge emphasis there not only on teaching you to teach, but in developing your personality. I mean, I went there as a 17 or 18-year-old, and I knew very little about the arts. And that's where my arts began, an interest in every kind of arts. And it's a shame now that because, schooling in the arts develops your thinking process. It's the most wonderful basis for learning, helping you to learn. And now it's become much more academic. There's not enough arts in the Teachers College, in my opinion, which helps develop you as a personality hugely.
There's one girl who comes from Russia who's a very good painter, and she teaches something which I totally believe in, that the basis of all art is good observation.
True.
Whether it's as an actor or a painter. And I think observation, I used to work with observation through the senses, so you could, with children, it was a good way to get them to start observing.
Well, you see, Arthur Barker, who was the nature study guy and the science guy there, he taught me to observe in the open. He would take us out into the botanical gardens and you'd say, there's a so-and-so, there must be a so-and-so somewhere else, and up the bank he'd go and we'd all go up with him and so on. And I think it's incredibly important for children to be tutored in natural things too, especially now when everything is, what do you call it, mechanical, and they spend all their time on machines. And I think they need that balance with nature and the arts to sort of, to form a balance, really.
Yeah, but
and
also
stop them closing mental
to
down.
discover yourself. It takes some time to develop some knowledge of yourself, to use yourself properly. And I think you can only do this if you get the chance to shall we say, explore yourself and to use that exploration in creative ways.
So
now,
you were a student of mine when I was on the staff there.
No, but you were on the staff with,
right,
and your influence went beyond the people that you spoke with. I mean, people like Grant Tilley, who was a great friend of mine and somebody who I agreed with. Grant and I totally agreed with everything about the arts. We, at one stage, there was an effort by, I think, the Gordon Tovey and co to sort of take over the arts as their dominion. And to right, Gordon Tovey did wonderful things for Maori art, but outside of that he didn't have great experience or knowledge. And I think that the fact that all arts need to be explored, not just one, is for you to discover what talents you do have. I think that training college gave you that chance to explore.
Yes, which you took. You're very strong in music, painting. Yeah.
And most of that came from the chance to explore, to have rooms open for people to go into and try things, and being challenged all the time. That's another aspect of Teachers College. I mean, somebody like Anton Bott would actually challenge you and make an effort to do something like great people you were taught about. And I think that was important too. And I believe actually personally that that teaching is a performing art
Mm.
more
It is.
than anything else. And teachers should have knowledge and personality to give enthusiasm to children to learn. And
Sure.
too many people coming through the education system these days don't get that chance to do that.
Oh well.
Anyway, I'm going to move away from this to, you went from Teachers College to study overseas. Now you were
Yes.
studying drama in education, I believe.
Yes, I'm just trying to think. When I was over there in the early 50s, before I went on to the staff, I think I went to classes, and I'm a bit vague on dates, and I went to classes with in drama and education with a woman called Maisie Cobby, who's written books, and Brian Way, and Peter Slade, who wrote the great book Child Drama, and taught me about that children's natural way of doing drama was in the round. So he worked them in the round in a hall, and that's where I learnt about working in the round and improvisation. And when I came back on to the staff in Wellington, those are the things I taught in what was a huge drama club. I think about 90 students, and Grant was in that, and Michael Haig and people like that. And I can still see them pouncing around to music in the hall and thoroughly enjoying themselves.
David Cruz and Mike Haig were
yes.
Rongotai with me, but there were other people like Jenny Priestley and Dinah Priestley's, the Priestleys who...
Lawson Patrick.
There were lots of other people who came through and have since those days made a statement in the arts in some way or
very much
another.
so. I mean,
Now, let's move a little bit. You went back and you got involved with Laurence Olivier and the English National Theatre. How did that happen?
well, I think when I was at Teachers College, I started directing plays, which I had never done before, and they seemed to work extremely well. First one I did was James Thurber's The Male Animal, and that was a huge success. Michael Haig was in that, and I thought, well, I'd really like to learn more about this, so I applied for and got a little government grant, which got me over to Britain, and I had been reading about the Royal Court Theatre, the English Stage Company, which did new plays, and I got interviewed by George Devine and asked if I could come and watch, and he said, well, puffing on his pipe, you don't learn anything by watching. You'd better come and work for us. We've got a little vacancy for an assistant stage manager, which was about £8 a week or something like that. And so I spun my bursary out by doing that. So I took that, and that's where I learned. And I also, part of that, I worked in the workshop making props and learning all about that side of things, because we had no professional theatre here, and I wanted to learn about it before I came back. And what was the question?
Well, I think you answered it, whatever it was. But
now did they ask me? Well, I came over. How I got to meet him was when I worked at the Royal Court. He and Vivian Lee did a play there called Look After Lulu or something, silly play it was, and he used to come round and visit her, although he was separating from her then and getting in with Joan Plowright, who I also met there. That's where I started meeting people. And he started the Chichester Festival Theatre in its very first year. So I was invited by the manager of the Royal Court, Pete Rogers, to go down there as what I called a general dog's body, which was a sort of a production assistant.
PA.
That's right, to Sir Lawrence, I think. Can't think of his name. A very well-known director was his actual assistant. So that's got me down there, And I went to the first year of that, watched it all being built actually, and the second year of it. And from that, the National Theatre was formed. And so some people that were at Chichester went to the National Theatre, and I was invited to go as an assistant director, which was, you know, helping to look after the director, rehearsing all the understudies, people like Mike Gambon, who was a great gangling youth. I rehearsed him, and you know, it's sort of amazing. I look at the television now and I think, gosh, I've worked with them when they were kids, you know, and they're all like this now. And yeah, so that's what set me off really. And then I became what was called assistant to Sir Lawrence. I used to, you know, have to go and get the director's dog from the pound and that sort of thing and buy their dinner, and you know, and occasionally you were asked your opinion about a play. And we were in the old Vic then.
Did you keep notes on the production? Was that part of your job or not?
No, but I used to make notes on my own script.
Just in case you were required to do it if it was going to be done again. Take over.
Didn't quite get that.
No, I did.
No.
So I was.
Very interesting time. We started the National Theatre, and I got to know a great many brilliant and very well-known actors. We had no idea at the time what historic thing we were making. You just did it. It was a job. And I think why I got on so well in the theatre was being sort of a New Zealander, we were hard-working. We didn't sort of kowtow to people. I mean, I just talked to them
naturally.
You know, I didn't sort of say, oh, whatever. And you just did your job. And so, I mean, I would find like, I would go to, say, a party, and someone like Michael Redgrave, who was actually a very shy man,
yes,
he would always gravitate and sit with me because I would just talk to him quite naturally. I think, I'm sort of thinking back. I mean, I didn't think about it for years and years and years, and I don't think about it very much now. It was just something that I did, and it progressed. I reckon that anyone can do anything, really, if they're given the right help, which I have been all my life, particularly by teachers. I had some amazing teachers. And if you're prepared to take risks, you know, and you just go from one thing to another, and you're free to do it.
That's very true. I came to see the wonderful Uncle Vanya with amazing cast, and Sean Kenny had a thrust stage.
Yes.
Now, I think the thrust stage is a magnificent form
Yes.
of performance where you get really close to the audience.
Yes.
And Kevin Boone and I were within 10 feet of actors, and you got a real gutsy performance from them. You know, it was a great place to see actors acting.
That was the first thrust stage. Actually, there was one man called Stephen Joseph had done some productions in the round up in Newcastle, I think, but otherwise there was very little done in the round or pushed out with audience all around. It was historic, really historic.
Well, I
think building.
Myself, I think I'd like all the schools in New Zealand to have thrust stages because it gives a chance of people to be close to your audience or at a distance. It's, to me,
work around yourself.
Yes, you can do it in the round, partially in the round because of its thrust stage. And I think being there and watching that performance with Laurence Olivier and many others, I just saw the top actors of the time performing in close-up, which was amazing. Amazing.
Did you see Rosemary Harris or Joan Greenwood play the main woman? Or perhaps don't remember. Joan Greenwood had that strange voice. She played it for about a fortnight, and Rosie, who was quite an actor in a time living in America, she came over, she understudied it. You know, it's amazing. And then she took it over. And I still keep in touch with her. You know, I rang her the other day.
In fact, I happened to have the thing. I couldn't find it. I've actually got the cast and all that. Although I've got one program here, it's not the complete one that I've got.
No.
I've got another one as well. And that one has got all the data of who I saw and were not.
They were great, those National Theatre programs. Really special.
But in that period, every company, whether it was the Opera Company or National Theatre or Royal Shakespeare Company, all produced wonderful programs with really learned people writing about those things.
Yeah, you're lucky to have them.
And I disagree with the guys who told you that you can't learn by just observing and watching things. One of the best learning experiences I've ever had was watching Anthony Besh, the great opera producer, work with New Zealand singers, and the detail and how it all came and the time he spent and the way he used music. And I really thought he could read music. When I visited him in London, I discovered he was memorising it by rote. He could not read music. And
amazing.
He used to say, on bar such and such, Peter, would you come in or would you do this? And unfortunately I could read music, so I could do it, which allowed me to get into things which he was producing in London, which was amazing. And another thing you said was the ease with which New Zealanders tended to get into things, because I think a large degree people couldn't pin us down also. If you went to the right schools or the wrong schools, you could get into lots of trouble in England.
Yes.
But if you came from Rongadai College or Wellington East Coast College, nobody would know anything about it. So you were a strange creature from another world. And I think that was very important too.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to move into one or two figures. Lawrence Olivier, let's talk about Peter Brook as a director. How did you? I saw him doing experimental theatre at the Lambda Theatre, which was a great experience.
Yes. Yes, he was ahead of his time in that. I did work with him a bit. I helped him to cast something. I think it was Oedipus. I can't quite remember.
It could be.
I know they had to rehearse for about 12 weeks and he was very demanding, but very meticulous, and I think he taught people quite a lot. I don't remember that much about him.
He must have worked with the actor to develop things.
Yes.
Whereas in contrast with Lawrence Olivier, who planned, you told me earlier that he planned everything beforehand, and he was virtually acting each role and getting the thing organised. He was more strict in that way.
Was it Oedipus, or one of his productions, that had this giant penis, and a 7-foot high penis, and created, and it was carted in through the audience. He had actors standing in the audience strapped to columns, and he had this penis carted in by a group. No, he didn't. I'm telling a lie. The penis. Oh yes, he did. But the rehearsal thing was an inflatable penis, and he didn't tell anybody. And there was this thing sitting on the stage, and there were guys down below with a vacuum cleaner, and they puffed it up, and it rose in the air, startled everybody. And the production manager of the whole theatre came over to my office one day. I've forgotten his name, and he said to me, I've got to tell you something funny that's just happened. The theatre van was stolen. And I said, oh yes. And the police came and they said, what was in it? And I said, a 7-foot inflatable penis. You know, we used to have such fun with things like that.
Well,
anyway, that's by the way.
remember.
I'm just remembering all these funny stories now.
I'll never forget the time I saw Peter Brook doing excerpts from Hamlet at the Lambda Theatre, and watching Hamlet doing To Be or Not to Be on a swing above the audience.
Oh yeah.
To be or not to be. And I just thought that the whole idea of the pendulum and the words being spoken knitted together in the most original way and it made me think what a great director he was.
Yes, it was very original.
Now, later on, we had when you came back to New Zealand. What was your plan? What did you want to do at Downstage when you came back?
Yeah, I was invited back to run Downstage when it was at the Old Star Boating Club, you know. And I thought, well, God, they're asking a woman to do this, which was unheard of in the 70s. Two, they're asking a New Zealander, because before that, they were always had someone from overseas rep would be better, and they weren't. Some of them were very flopsy doodles. And C, they're asking me, and B, I ought to be giving something back for my bursary, because there was no holds on it. You got 50 quid towards your return fare if you came back within 2 years. And I was away over there for years and years and years. And I thought, oh, I'll come back for 2 years. So I came back, and at the end of the first year, they said, would I stay a further 3 and see them into the Hannah Playhouse, which was just being built. You know, there was an old coffee bar thing, and I saw that to the ground, and that's where I had seen Downstage. I'd come out for a quick trip, and George and his wife, George Laking, they took me to it, and it was the first theatre in the world to have a meal served. You could get coffee at a theatre in New York, something like with, you know, and we sat there, and we had sort of like a very indifferent meal, like sort of slightly cold sausage and mashed potatoes.
Yes, I remember.
And the Lakings kept saying, look, it's not always like this. And although the 2 plays were sort of in different plays that were very well directed, I said, I just think it's amazing to be sitting here like this with this little group, you know, watching this play. So when I was asked would I come back, I, you know, came. And so I saw it into the Hannah Playhouse, and then they asked me if I'd like to stay longer. And then I thought, well, I don't really want to go old and poor in London. I must come back here to live, which I did. And I came out in September 70, I think, and I don't know quite when this was. Yeah, I left. Oh, I left it early in 75. I've never regretted it. I've never wanted to go back to live in London. It's been great. And at that time in the 70s, New Zealand was a really interesting place. There was all sorts of development in the arts. You know, pottery was expanding, and big influx of Pacific Island people. It was, you know, it was humming. So I made the right decision, and I bought a little house and invested in a little house, and it was good. Away we went.
Now, we had a visit by one of the outstanding foreign directors while you were here at that time. I'm trying to find his bloody name. Grotowski.
Polish.
Yes, Polish director. Very much in the sort of vogue of Peter Brook, I thought.
Yes, he was very inventive. I'm trying to think of the guy who went over there and worked with him. Someone in the theatre. Yes, he came out. I didn't know him all that well. He gave a lecture, the thing you were talking about earlier on, which everybody went to up at the university, which was amazing. I can't remember his total bent, but I can remember sitting there and saying, if a bomb fell on this theatre, on this place today, New Zealand theatre would be completely wiped out, which it would have, because everybody had come from all over the country to hear this lecture.
Yes, in those days we tended to get this sort of visit by people from overseas, and also there were a lot of New Zealanders doing things. I don't know whether the time span, this would be in the 1960s, I suppose 1960s, we had the sort of development of the opera company and the ballet company and the Dick Campion's earlier work with the
Mm.
New Zealand players. Did you get involved with Dick with those things, or?
I knew Dick quite well. I don't know whether I actually worked with him or not. I can remember going to this church hall in Newtown when he did that production of what's a New Zealand play? A very well known New Zealand play. Oh dear. Never mind. So, and I used to keep in touch with him and Edith. And I think he must have, I don't know, done some productions when I was running Downstage. I just can't remember. He was very important in his time
I
because
regarded
he sort of established a bit of a professional theatre here, really, didn't he?
well, him and his money, the money of his wife and the family,
Edith's money,
virtually allowed New Zealand to develop its first post-war professional theatre.
That's right.
And it was very
The
sad
players.
that towards the end, after he was no longer connected with it, but gradually the whole concept wound down, and it took a long time for the regional, what one would describe as the regional theatre, that's the Downstage, and there was the equivalent in Auckland and Christchurch, began. Which what was when you took over Downstage? What was your dream? What did you want to do with Downstage?
I can't remember.
I mean,
I was certainly responsible for the development of New Zealand writing, but not in the first instance. I mean, there was a writer guy who said I should open Downstage at the Hannah with a new New Zealand play, and he was very cross that I didn't. And I said, You don't open a new theatre with a new unknown play. It would be a very dodgy thing to do.
I agree.
So I had suggested that we open with a Shakespeare, which I'd never, and I'd announced this. I had never directed a Shakespeare, and I wanted them to do much ado about nothing, but they thought that was a very naughty title to open
Yes,
bring new
I
theatre.
can understand
So I
that
said,
too.
all right, we'll do As You Like It, which is what we did, of course, and it went quite well.
Now that was the
What was
time you
question
worked.
again?
That was the time you worked first. Was that the first time you worked with Raymond?
No, because I must have worked. I worked with Raymond at the old boating shed. In fact, when I returned from overseas to the old boating shed, it was a very wet day, and I was wearing a very posh PVC red raincoat down to there, all the latest, whatever. I went in there with Raymond, and I had the most terrible cold, I remember. And I looked around and I said, how do you get away with it? He said, what do you mean? I said, it's the biggest fire trap I've ever seen. And it was. It was a wooden building.
Yeah, true.
It wasn't fireproofed. In England, the fire people used to come around and put a flame to the curtains.
Yeah.
If they weren't fireproofed, it would all go up. So they were fireproof. So I certainly introduced fireproofing very quickly. It was so funny. That's when I first met Raymond. And what the hell play did we do? It might have been Uncle Vanya. Can't remember. Because Uncle Vanya was done in the boating shed. Oh, that's the first one I think I did with him. Yeah.
But you did do a Shakespeare with Raymond. I know he talks about
As
it
You
in
Like
the
It.
film. Yes.
And he did it right across the middle of the theatre. Very dramatic, like that, with just a single tree. The actors hated it because they'd never worked on a slope before, so it's just at that. And meals was either side, you know, you're sitting there chomping away, watching the play, and people really didn't quite, but it's weird. But you know, I remember when that Hannah Playhouse was being built, and the roof was leaking and hadn't been occupied, and a very well-known lighting person called Richard Pilbrow had come out from overseas. I can't think of what for, and he came in to have a look with me, and we stood up in the, you know, upstairs, and he looked at it and he said, "This is the most extraordinary theatre." He was absolutely full of admiration for it.
I saw an article by him in one of the big lighting magazines, and it raved about it.
Oh, really?
Bill Sheet showed it to me, and
Oh,
I went, "Oh, on the
interesting.
film on Raymond, he describes and reads it out." And the film I made on Raymond, and Pilbrow raved about it.
Good.
Downstage, I worked with Downstage mainly when they did "Oh What a Lovely War." I was in that.
Oh,
Now that was before your time.
Yeah, just
and
before.
then I designed 2 or 3 things that Noel Miller did there, including the Dumbwaiter and Tiger and Typists with Nola. I can't remember who wrote them, and but I never did.
Pinter the Dumbwaiter.
I never did anything after that for Downstage, but I was even in an opera at Downstage, singing at one stage. So I had a connection with Downstage right at the beginning. Bruce Mason, not a very good director, directed Little Sweep, Benjamin Britten's Little Sweep, which was quite entertaining. So I had the connection with that. But I want to get back to the other area, which is your involvement with the importance of drama and the arts in education. What's your feeling about the sad state of it today?
Well, after I finished at Downstage, I was invited by Bill Rennick to come and be the first education officer for drama and education. They had a very special group there of sort of way out officers, and so I developed. I had held courses for teachers and went throughout the country. We had courses, and that put a lot of drama in education into the schools, but there's much more emphasis on academics these days, and I think it's a great pity that the arts seem to be fading in schools, because they're a very important part of children's education, and they help them to learn. I mean, you can certainly learn through drama. We had this amazing woman, Dorothy Heskett, came out and did courses here, and she developed drama and education. And we had a big surge after that. Well, children just learn through doing the arts and develop confidence, and I think they're the most important part of education, as we knew from Teachers College.
Well, and Beebe
was important.
I think Beebe was terribly important. He constructed, under Peter Fraser, an amazing new education system.
That's right.
He wiped out all the stupid exams and the way things were taught formally before that, and suddenly the teaching profession had to look in a new direction, which I think we did. I'm going to go back to Downstage, because you must have some feelings about the sad demise of Downstage.
Well,
there was a bit of an argument about whether it should have had a company, been a company rather than individuals. Or I know Raymond had some ideas about that. And what do you think about the state of Downstage?
Well, I wasn't all that weepy about it, because it had 50 years, and that is an extraordinary length of time for a
Yeah.
theatre company
Yeah.
to go, and it developed all sorts of things in its time.
Mm-hmm.
It's in many ways a quite tricky building, you know, those steep stairs up,
Yeah.
and of course Constance, the great Constance Kirkcaldy, had the lift put in, and that was helpful, but not that many people use it. I must say I do if I go there. And it was great when they ran the cafe and the doors were open. You know, there was a sort of a vivacity about it. It got a bit sort of, not defunct, but, well, it wasn't being used all that much, and that was partly because it was so expensive to hire, and they didn't have lighting equipment and that. You used to have to bring in your own, because it's all just been revived and changed, and you know, I haven't been in it recently, but I believe it's affordable now, and you know, so very few theatres in Britain, like rep theatres and that survive for 50 years. This is amazing. I don't think people realise that. Um, so, not to be negative, it would be good to have it opened again. I mean, Bats is the most lively theatre. Really.
Circa.
Yeah, Circa's come up. It's interesting about Circa because while I was still there, yeah, Grant Tilley and some others came to me and said, we think Downstage should become an actors' theatre.
Yeah.
Yes. And I said, well, roughly as I remembered, well, I don't think so. It's thriving. It is subsidised to about 35,000. It's very much an established theatre. If you really feel that you should have an actors' theatre, then you should go away and start one. And that's what led to Circa. And to be quite honest, I thought they'll last a year. Knowing the group,
Yep.
I can't remember who they all were,
Yeah.
they'll be there for a year. And I think it's amazing that it has survived and it's come to where it's come, you know, and I support it as much as I can. So, you know. But I'm glad that Hannah's having a new lease of life. At one point, I said, I think maybe it should become a supermarket. Blasphemy? Yeah, didn't know that, did you?
No, I didn't know
After
that.
all the effort I put into
No,
it.
that sounds. I mean, I have seen lots of things collapse, like the opera companies, series of opera companies have collapsed often because dilettantes and the power in running them has gone away from the people, the artists and the people involved, and gone to the dilettantes and the money people of the society who know nothing about that particular branch of the arts. And it's disappointed to me that often the experienced people don't get a say in these things.
True.
I find it frustrating that but it's common to all the arts, not just drama or painting or whatever you like to say. The people who like to be in control see it as the easy way of getting prestige, and most of them don't know, have never been involved in running theatre or running opera or running an orchestra, and they are expected to make decisions without knowledge.
Well, I think it's important that people who work on the Arts Council, whatever it's called these days, they often don't have enough people with a knowledge of the art. And so sometimes I think the funds are not distributed as well as they could be.
When you realise when the Arts Council started, they had 4 employees, they have 98 now.
Ridiculous.
That's the Arts Council.
Oh, that's absurd.
Because I knew somebody who was on the original Arts Council, the employees, Trish Laurie worked for the old Arts Council, and she said, poor people. And I think Bill Sheet told me before he died, they had 90-something employees. So where's the money going? You get the feeling it's bums on, bums on
I don't know.
yes, in rooms somewhere.
And also, when people apply, they don't very often give any money to older people, by the way.
True.
Who are doing some really good work. I don't know what I was going to say. So, yes, well, people apply and they don't get a very big grant, or if they do get a grant to develop, then they don't get a grant to perform. You know, you've got to follow along, I think. It's not easy these days, doing performance work. In fact, it's very difficult.
I don't think it's easy in any arts.
No.
I don't think there's, as I said, I think in general the people running the arts and the Arts Council are not knowledgeable enough to do their job. That's my comment. I'm not.
I don't know who they are at present, so
yeah.
Sorry, people, but
no, I'm not.
You do.
I'm quite prepared to say myself, but and I often say it. But I do feel that there were moments in time when, if the right people had got together, or at the right time, at the right place, we would still have Downstage running and several other things still going, and the academy would not be thrown out like it is.
Yes, because technology's taken over a lot of stuff, hasn't it, really?
Or, technology and the cost of technology.
So how are we going?
Well, I think we'll finish.
Wrap up soon.
Yes, I think we'll finish, unless there's something we haven't covered. I think most of these things. It's been very, very wonderful to speak to you, Sonny, and thank you for your time and efforts. If you were going to say something about drama in New Zealand during your time, what would you say?
Well, it's hard to cast my aged mind back over all those years. But I think it was an interesting time for when things were developing, as I say, possibly in all the arts. And I was really pleased to have also had, which we haven't discussed today, a hand in the development of Māori and Pacific theatre arts, particularly when I was temporarily in charge of the drama school, and we managed to get the student intake, which was only about 10 or 12 students, to 50-50 Māori Pacific and Pakeha. I think that was quite an achievement, and it led to quite a big development. So that I'm proud of, and I worked with not Bats Theatre, went to the other one. Anyway, to help make that possible, and also development of new work was important, and it was a good time. So